Chris Doumitt's story on Gold Rush is one that fans will never forget. For years, he was not just a familiar face on screen, but the steady hand that kept Parker Schnabel's ambitious mining operation running. People often saw him as the calm, smiling presence who could turn impossible situations into manageable ones. But behind the cameras, behind the big machines and piles of gold, there was a much more complicated story unfolding. And when Chris finally decided to walk away, it wasn't simply because of exhaustion, as so many assumed. It wasn't just burnout or age catching up to him. The real story is far more layered, and it reveals a clash of loyalty, respect, ambition, and self-worth. When Chris left Parker's crew, fans were shocked. Many blamed Parker's massive 10,000-ounce gold target for the season. That number wasn't just a goal, it was a back-breaking expectation that demanded endless hours, constant grinding, and almost superhuman effort from the crew. For Chris, who had already proven himself time and time again, this target became the tipping point. But here's the truth. His decision to walk away was not only about the hours or the exhaustion, it was about something deeper. It was about realizing that he was being treated as if he were just another machine, rather than a man who had given years of loyalty and expertise to Parker's success. Chris was not an ordinary worker in the mining world. He was the backbone of Parker's empire. While others focused on digging, hauling, and keeping the dirt moving, Chris was the one who oversaw the heart of the operation, the gold recovery process. He managed 3 massive wash plants, each of them critical to turning raw dirt into precious ounces of gold. He handled every cleanup, every fine detail, and every calculation that could mean the difference between profit and loss. Without him, Parker's ambitious goals would have been impossible. In fact, it's fair to say that many of Parker's record-breaking totals over the years were only possible because Chris was there, ensuring that nothing slipped through the cracks. But Parker's ambition seemed to grow faster than the operation could realistically handle. Standing in front of his crew one season, Parker laid out what would become one of the most extreme challenges in Gold Rush history. He announced his plan to run 3 massive wash plants at the same time, the Red Giant, the Crusher, and Slucifer. Each of these plants was capable of processing huge amounts of dirt, but running them all at once had never been attempted before on such a scale. It was an audacious move, one that promised record amounts of gold, but also placed unimaginable pressure on the crew. And at the center of it all was Chris, the man who would have to process every single ounce of gold that came out of those plants. Chris later admitted that the moment Parker announced this plan, he knew it was a disaster waiting to happen. Handling the cleanup and recovery from even 2 wash plants was already overwhelming. It required precision, focus, and endless hours of careful work. But 3 plants? That was beyond what any one person could handle. Still, Parker's decision left no room for doubt or hesitation. The season's success, the millions of dollars at stake, and the reputation of the entire operation all rested on pushing forward with this plan. For Chris, this meant drowning in a workload that no amount of skill or dedication could fully manage. Day after day, Chris pushed himself to the absolute limit. He worked 16 to 18 hours at a stretch, often without proper rest or meals. His hands shook from exhaustion, his body ached from the relentless pace, and his mind struggled to keep up with the pressure. Yet the gold kept flowing in, and Chris knew that every speck of it had to be recovered with perfection. A single mistake could erase weeks of hard labor from the entire crew. It wasn't just about doing his job anymore. It was about carrying the weight of the entire operation on his shoulders. For years, Chris had built a reputation as the man who never complained. He was dependable, steady, and professional in the harshest of conditions. He was the one Parker and the crew could count on to get things done, no matter how impossible they seemed. But this season was different. The impossible was now expected on a daily basis, and the toll it took on Chris began to show. Crew members who had once known him as the humor-filled, easygoing heart of the team started noticing the changes. His smile faded. His calm presence was replaced by a grim determination just to keep up with the mountain of work. The breaking point came during one of the most brutal weeks of the season. Equipment failures backed up material from all three plants, creating an overwhelming backlog of work for Chris. He labored for 20 straight hours without stopping, pushing himself beyond exhaustion. His hands shook so violently that he could no longer operate the scales with precision. For the first time in his career, Chris had to admit out loud that he needed help. When he turned to Parker, hoping for relief, the response exposed the real problem. Parker suggested pulling someone from field operations to assist in the processing room, but every operator in the field was already stretched thin. Taking one of them away would create bottlenecks and slow down production. In desperation, Chris suggested Tatiana Costa, a talented equipment operator, though she had no experience in gold recovery. It was a risky choice. The processing room required expertise, and even one small mistake could cost the crew thousands of dollars. But Parker agreed, and Tatiana was brought in to help. While Tatiana did her best, the decision left Chris feeling unsettled. To him, it was proof that Parker's ambition mattered more than the well-being of the people who made it all possible. Training someone with no experience on such critical work was not a solution, it was a gamble. And for Chris, it revealed something that cut deeper than exhaustion. It revealed a lack of respect. This was the real issue that finally pushed Chris over the edge. For years, he had been the foundation of Parker's success, yet he was being treated as if he were just another machine in a giant machine. The operation demanded more and more from him, but when he needed support, the solutions showed just how undervalued he was. The physical toll was massive, but the emotional weight of feeling unappreciated was even heavier. He had given his loyalty, his expertise, and his health to the operation, only to realize that it was not enough. And this is where the real story begins to unfold, not just of exhaustion, but of respect, loyalty, and the breaking of trust.
They picture him worn out, too tired to keep up, and ready to step away for an easier life. But when Chris finally opened up about what really happened, his words painted a very different picture. Yes, the physical demands were brutal. Yes, the exhaustion was real. But the core issue was respect, or rather, the lack of it. Chris explained that after everything he had done for Parker, after all the years of turning wild dreams into real gold totals, he felt like he was being treated no differently than a piece of equipment. To Parker, the machines were assets that needed to run at maximum capacity until they broke down. And Chris felt like he was being treated in exactly the same way. His loyalty, his knowledge, and even his health were being used up for the sake of bigger numbers, without acknowledgement of what it cost him personally. The truth is, Parker's operation was making millions. Each season brought in staggering totals of gold, translating into millions of dollars in revenue. Yet the people on the ground, the ones risking their health and giving every ounce of their energy, were seeing only a fraction of those rewards. For Chris, this imbalance became impossible to ignore. He was directly responsible for maximizing recovery, for ensuring that every single speck of gold was accounted for. Without his steady hands and his expertise, Parker's operation would never have reached the record-breaking numbers it became known for. But when he compared the value he brought to the operation with the compensation he received, the gap was undeniable. This frustration built quietly at first. Chris had never been the type to stir up conflict or complain. He had always been the guy who kept his head down, worked hard, and delivered results. But the longer he spent under Parker's ever-increasing demands, the more he began to feel that his loyalty was being taken for granted. And finally, it all came to a head one rainy evening in Parker's office trailer. Chris had just finished processing another massive cleanup. The scales in front of him displayed hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gold. the product of endless hours of labor from both the field crew and the processing room. But instead of feeling satisfaction, Chris felt only growing resentment. He had given everything he had to make Parker's vision a reality, yet he still felt like a disposable employee rather than a true partner in the success. That night, Chris decided it was time to speak up. He walked into Parker's trailer, where the young mining boss was hunched over his laptop crunching numbers and planning the next stage of the operation. Chris didn't waste time with small talk. Instead, he came straight to the point. We need to talk about how profits are shared in this operation. For a moment, Parker looked up in surprise. In all the years they had worked together, Chris had never raised financial concerns. He had always been focused on the job, not the money. But this time was different. The sacrifices, the exhaustion, and the lack of respect had finally reached a boiling point. Parker's initial response was practical, almost dismissive. He reminded Chris that the operation was breaking records, that everyone was benefiting from the success, and that the system was working as it always had. But Chris wasn't satisfied. Everyone? He asked. The single word carried all the frustration he had been holding back for years. What followed was not just a conversation, but a confrontation. Chris laid out his perspective clearly. The operation's success depended on the people who worked night and day to make it possible. The operators, the mechanics, and especially the person overseeing gold recovery were not just employees. They were the reason Parker's vision were becoming reality. Without them, there would be no gold. And if the rewards were not shared fairly, then what did loyalty really mean? Parker saw things differently. To him, the vision, the risk, and the ownership were his. The crew members were important, yes, but they were still employees. They were paid for their work, and that was where the obligation ended. He reminded Chris that every person on the crew had been well compensated compared to industry standards, but ultimately, they were replaceable. Those words cut deep. Replaceable. After years of loyalty, years of sacrifice, and years of carrying the weight of the operation, Chris suddenly saw the reality of how Parker viewed him. Not as a partner, not as a valued leader, but just another piece of equipment in a system designed to feed one man's ambition. The breaking moment came when Parker, clearly frustrated, told Chris that if he couldn't handle the workload and responsibility anymore, maybe he wasn't the right person for the position. To Chris, it was like a slap in the face. After everything he had done, after all the times he had pushed himself beyond human limits, he was now being told that he might not be the right fit. That was the moment when Chris realized he had reached the end. The loyalty he had given so freely was not being returned. The respect he had earned was not being shown, and the health and well-being he had sacrificed were being dismissed as the cost of doing business. Chris walked out of that trailer knowing the truth. He could no longer stay. His time with Parker's crew was over.
The physical toll of those final months was undeniable. He was working 16 to 18 hours every single day, running on little more than caffeine and determination. His hands shook from exhaustion. His body ached constantly. Meals were rushed, and sleep was almost non-existent. But worse than the physical strain was the emotional toll. Chris described it as losing himself. The man who once brought laughter to the crew, who acted as a mentor to younger workers, and who held the team together during the hardest times, began to disappear. In his place was someone mechanical, someone running purely on survival instinct, focused only on keeping up with impossible demands. That transformation was heartbreaking, not just for Chris, but also for those around him. Crew members noticed the difference. The steady, humorous figure they had relied on was now a shadow of himself, his spirit ground down by exhaustion and resentment. In those moments, Chris realized he had two choices. He could stay and allow the job to completely consume him, turning him into someone he no longer recognized, or he could walk away before it was too late. Walking away meant giving up substantial income and a career that had defined him for years.
But staying meant losing his health, his dignity, and ultimately, his sense of self. For Chris, the decision became clear. Gold wasn't worth his soul. When he finally left, the ripple effects spread quickly through Parker's operation. The crew, who had always looked up to him, suddenly saw that even the most loyal and skilled among them could be pushed too far. It sent a chilling message. If someone like Chris could be treated as replaceable, then none of them were truly safe from exploitation. The family-like atmosphere that had once characterized Parker's team started to erode. People began watching their backs, calculating their own limits, and wondering if loyalty really meant anything at all. The absence of Chris's expertise was felt immediately. Gold recovery numbers began to drop. Mistakes in processing became more common. Workers thrown into the recovery room couldn't match his precision, speed, or experience. Each missed speck of gold represented lost money, and slowly but surely, the operation's efficiency declined. Parker tried to downplay the impact, but the numbers told a different story. Without Chris, the backbone of the system was gone. Meanwhile, Chris found himself in an entirely different world, back in his carpentry workshop. For years, mining had defined his identity. It had consumed his time, energy, and focus. But woodworking brought him back to his roots. It reminded him of what he loved most: precision, patience, and the satisfaction of creating something lasting. Unlike gold mining, where everything was about speed and quantity, woodworking was about quality. It was a craft that rewarded attention to detail and pride in one's work. Chris admitted that walking away from the mining world wasn't easy. He gave up significant income and the recognition that came with being a central figure in one of television's most successful reality series. But what he gained was far more valuable: peace of mind, a healthier lifestyle, and the chance to reconnect with the person he truly wanted to be. He no longer measured his worth in ounces of gold processed, but in the dignity of doing honest work at his own pace. When asked if he regretted leaving so much money behind, Chris gave an answer that revealed just how much his perspective had shifted. "You can't enjoy wealth if you hate who you became earning it," he explained. "Sometimes the most valuable thing you can find isn't gold. It's your own self-worth." The Yukon had taught him hard lessons. He saw how ambition could drive people to push themselves and others beyond reasonable limits. He saw how loyalty could be tested, and how even the strongest relationships could fracture under the pressure of money and glory. But he also discovered that walking away, while difficult, was sometimes the strongest decision a person could make. Chris's departure did more than just alter the dynamics of Parker's operation. It sparked conversations across the entire mining community and even among fans of Gold Rush who had followed his journey for years. Viewers who tuned in each week weren't just watching machines dig dirt. They were connecting with the personalities who brought those stories to life. And for many of them, Chris was more than just another crew member. He was the steady, reliable figure who represented loyalty, patience, and quiet strength in the face of chaos. When the news of his exit broke, fans flooded social media with questions, theories, and heartfelt tributes. Some accepted the burnout explanation at face value, expressing sympathy for the toll such a demanding job must have taken. Others, however, sensed there was more to the story. They had seen the subtle signs on screen, the tired eyes, the heavy sighs, the way Chris seemed less engaged during his final season. To those fans, the official explanation felt incomplete, like a convenient cover for deeper tensions behind the scenes. And in a way, they were right, because Chris's exit wasn't just about exhaustion. It was about values. It was about respect, and it was about recognizing when a line had been crossed. The truth is, Chris left behind a legacy that continues to echo in the industry. He became a symbol of what happens when loyalty collides with ambition, when human dignity is overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of profit. To younger miners just starting their careers, his story became a cautionary tale. No matter how skilled or loyal you are, you must never lose sight of your own worth. To fans, his departure was a reminder that even the strongest people can be worn down when respect and fairness are missing. What makes Chris's story even more powerful is the contrast between his quiet exit and the massive impact he had during his time on the crew. For nearly a decade, he was the person Parker relied on most when it came to gold recovery. Every ounce of gold that came through Parker's sluices passed through Chris's hands. His meticulous attention to detail ensured that nothing was wasted, that every speck of dust was accounted for. That kind of contribution isn't just technical, it's financial. It directly translated into millions of dollars over the years. And yet, when he walked away, the operation kept going as if he were just another employee. That's what cut deepest. The realization that no matter how much you give, some people will never truly see your value. But Chris didn't let bitterness define him. Instead, he used the experience to reshape his life. He poured his energy into carpentry, a field where his skill and patience could shine without the toxic pressures of reality TV. He rediscovered joy in creating with his hands, building furniture, restoring pieces, and taking pride in the craft itself rather than chasing the next big payday. For Chris, woodworking wasn't about glory or wealth. It was about balance, peace, and the dignity of honest labor. Fans who followed his journey found inspiration in this transition. Many reached out to say that his decision gave them courage to make changes in their own lives, to leave jobs where they felt undervalued, to step away from unhealthy environments, or to pursue passions they had long neglected. Chris may have left the Yukon, but his story continued to resonate because it was ultimately about something universal: the struggle to find balance between success and self-respect. And even Parker, though reluctant to admit it at the time, eventually acknowledged the hole Chris left behind. In interviews years later, he hinted at the difficulty of replacing someone so skilled and reliable. The truth was unavoidable. Chris wasn't just another crew member. He was a pillar of the operation, and losing him forced Parker to confront the limits of his relentless drive. Looking back now, Chris's exit feels less like the end of a chapter and more like a turning point. It was a moment that revealed the true cost of ambition, not just in ounces of gold or hours of labor, but in relationships, trust, and loyalty. It forced fans and crew alike to ask hard questions about what success is really worth. Because what good is all the gold in the world if the people who helped you find it walk away feeling used, disrespected, and forgotten? Chris may never return to the Yukon, and he may never again stand beside a sluice box counting out gold by the ounce. But his story will remain part of Gold Rush history forever. Not as a tale of burnout, as the show would like us to believe, but as a deeper lesson about human dignity in a world consumed by profit.
As time goes on, the story of Chris Doumitt continues to remind us of something bigger than gold, bigger than ratings, and even bigger than the Yukon itself. His quiet departure wasn't just an ending, it was a message that echoed far beyond the mine, reaching anyone who has ever felt the weight of giving everything only to feel overlooked in the end. For years, Chris stood shoulder to shoulder with Parker Schnabel through freezing nights, equipment failures, and back-breaking days where every shovel of dirt carried the hope of striking gold. He gave more than just labor. He gave loyalty. And loyalty in any profession is priceless. But when loyalty is met with silence, or worse, with disregard, it eventually breaks. And that is exactly what happened on that cold Yukon ground. Chris didn't explode with anger. He didn't make a dramatic scene. He did what he had always done. He handled it with quiet dignity. He walked away, not out of weakness, but out of strength. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is know when to say enough is enough. And isn't that a lesson for all of us? We live in a world where ambition is glorified, where success is measured by the size of your paycheck, the hours you grind, and the sacrifices you make to make it.
But Chris's story shows us that real success is not about how much you earn. It's about whether you can look in the mirror and respect the life you're living. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone, no boss, no system, no spotlight, take that from you. In many ways, Chris found more gold after leaving the mine than he ever did while working in it. Not the kind of gold you can weigh on a scale or sell for cash, but the kind that fills your soul. Peace, freedom, and fulfillment. By turning to woodworking, he chose a life that was slower, calmer, and truer to who he was. And in doing so, he showed that you don't need millions of dollars or global fame to feel rich. You only need the courage to choose a path that honors your spirit. Parker went on with his operation, and the show continues. But something shifted the day Chris walked away. Viewers felt it, crew members felt it, and even Parker, whether he admits it or not, felt it. Because men like Chris don't come around often. He wasn't more than a worker. He was a reminder of the values that keep any team together: respect, loyalty, and trust. So when people ask, why did Chris Doumitt really leave? The answer isn't burnout. It isn't exhaustion. It isn't even conflict. The real reason is simple. He left because he valued himself, because he knew that no amount of gold was worth more than his dignity, his peace of mind, and his happiness. And that's what makes his story timeless. It's not just about mining. It's not just about gold rush. It's about every one of us who has ever had to make the hard choice between staying somewhere we don't belong or stepping into the unknown in search of something better. Chris chose the unknown, and in doing so, he proved that the bravest decisions are not always the loudest, but the ones that honor who we truly are. Years from now, when fans look back on the legacy of Gold Rush, they will remember the big finds, the massive wash plants, and the drama of chasing millions in gold. But they will also remember Chris Doumitt, the man with the steady hands, the quiet smile, and the courage to walk away when the price of loyalty became too high. And maybe, just maybe, that will be his greatest treasure of all. When Chris stepped away, the cameras kept rolling, the wash plants kept turning, and the gold kept being hauled from the ground. But for many fans, something was missing. The operation may have been bigger than ever, but it no longer felt the same. That easy smile, that calm voice, and the steady presence that made chaos bearable, those were gone. And viewers noticed. People began flooding fan forums and social media with questions. Where's Chris? Why did he leave? What happened behind the scenes? The official story was neat, clean, and simple. He was tired, maybe burned out, and decided to retire quietly. But fans who had watched him for years knew better. They had seen the man who never quit, who never backed down from a challenge. For someone like Chris, burnout wasn't the full story. It couldn't be. That curiosity is why his silence mattered so much. For years, he let the public believe the polished explanation. But when he finally opened up, the truth hit harder than anyone expected. It wasn't about running out of energy. It wasn't about being too old for the job. It was about being pushed past the breaking point. Not by the ground, not by the Yukon, but by people who should have valued him more than they did. Think about it. Chris wasn't just another name on the payroll. He was the man turning dirt into money. Every cleanup, every ounce, every season's success, it all flowed through his hands. And yet, at the end of the day, he was treated as replaceable. That's the wound that cut the deepest. What makes his story so powerful is that it shines a light on something universal. You don't have to work in mining to relate to Chris. You could be in an office, a factory, a hospital, or a classroom. Anywhere people give their all only to feel invisible when it matters most. Chris's story is a mirror, showing us the cost of ambition when respect is missing. And that's why fans continue to talk about him long after his exit. Because he wasn't just a gold miner on TV, he was the voice of everyone who has ever wanted to be seen for their worth, not just their output. After leaving, Chris didn't chase fame. He didn't seek revenge. He returned to something simple, honest, and grounding, working with his hands in carpentry. For some, that might seem like a step down from being on a global television show. But for Chris, it was a step up into freedom. No more crushing hours, no more impossible demands, no more being measured by how much money someone else could make off his work. Just the quiet satisfaction of building something real, something lasting, something that reflected him, not Parker, not the cameras, but him. And that is why when people ask if he regrets leaving, his answer is always clear. No. Because money fades, fame fades, but self-respect, the knowledge that you lived your life on your terms, that never fades. His choice continues to echo through the mining world. Younger workers talk about it as a cautionary tale, a reminder that chasing gold at any cost can destroy you if you're not careful. And even fans who never set foot in the Yukon carry his story as a reminder in their own lives. No paycheck is worth losing yourself. In the end, Chris Doumitt may not have found the legendary lost treasure of the Yukon, but he found something far more valuable. He found the courage to put himself first. He found the wisdom to step away before the dream turned into a nightmare. And he found peace in knowing that true wealth isn't measured in ounces of gold, but in moments of dignity, freedom, and joy.